Okay, hello everybody. Well, good that I can talk for a few minutes here. I would also like to use this opportunity to thank other people of CWI who are running our institute in this crazy time, and I think it's going actually, given the circumstances, it's going very well. Yeah, I just wanted to talk a few minutes, so I will just directly delve into the details. With a group of people at CWI, Peter Bonks has been talking about that also. We've been getting involved in Corona research right from start, basically, when the first measures were taken. And in those first week, I talked to a lot of people, I read a lot about it, and I prepared a little lecture just for a few minutes, which by now, I guess many of the things I'm going to tell you, many of you will already know, because now we're 4 weeks later and all these things have been discussed over and over again. But still, you still hear sometimes people saying things which are simply wrong, so I am going to tell you these things anyway. So this is about how Corona is just really very, very difficult to handle and very, very different from the flu. So this starts with, well, everybody will have heard of that by now, the reproduction number R0, which is the number of persons that an infected person infects on average. So for Corona, this is about 2.5, probably. I mean, there are many different estimates of this. And the whole idea of the measures that have been taken all around the world by now is, so social distancing, is to get this down to below 1. If it goes below 1, then slowly but surely the disease will die away, because the number of people who have the disease will go down exponentially. If it's larger than 1, then the number of people who have the disease will grow exponentially until a large percentage of the population actually has had it. But now there's something which I think still it hasn't been enough in all the newspaper articles, etc. And that's what some people from CWI stressed right from the start, which is that the uncertainty about these quantities like R0 is really enormous. And it's a type of uncertainty which is totally incomparable with the uncertainty you have in a standard statistical problem. Like if you measure people hate, you can get away with saying, okay, the average person in the Netherlands, the average male is about 1 meter 85 centimeters, and you know that most people will be a bit higher and a bit lower, but nobody will be much higher, much larger than 2 meters tall, for example. But here, this R0 is connected to the growth rate in an exponential process, and for that, it's a completely different story. Because if you change R0 a little bit, then what happens 2 weeks from now may be completely different in terms of how many people are infected, and more importantly, how many people need to go to hospital. So when you play around with this, and there's actually, it's a very simplified model, but still there's a model on the internet where you can play around with this yourself. You see that if you implement social distancing, and if I can, here we interpret it in a very simplified manner. We say social distancing means that you don't have any social contacts anymore. You just stay alone at your house. So if 75% of people would do perfect social distancing and 25% would lead a normal life, then maybe everything would go okay, in the sense that the hospital beds don't fill up. So of course we get more people in hospital, but we never get an overload. So our hospital system doesn't crash. But if you change it a little bit to 70% rather than 75%, then this suddenly means that like 4,000 people may need to go to the intensive care, the emergency room, but cannot go there because it's full. So small distances in these parameters can make a huge difference in number of lives saved and things like that. But this would be the case if R0 would be 2.4. But if R0 is 3, then we get completely different numbers again. So the uncertainty in these things is enormous. And the big problem is that we don't have any idea of what, we know that social distancing does something. We can actually see it in the curves, they get better, but we don't know exactly what it does. Is it 70, is it 75%? And the difference is enormous. And then there's, of course, also an enormous feedback problem, because if you take some measures like social distancing, you only see what happens after almost 2 weeks. And if what you did was not the right thing, then in the meantime, you have exponential growth. So again, it makes for an enormous difference. So this is one of the ways in which this disease is so completely different from the flu, because with the flu, the incubation time is about 2 to 3 days, and here it's on average 5 days, can even be much longer. And before you get really very sick, can also take about 5 days or even longer. So there's a delayed feedback problem. This is like the general theme here is that you still, I mean, last week I still had a conversation with a friend who still said, like, we're doing way too much and think of all the economic damage, and in the long run, and I think that is true, in the long run, the economic damage will also kill people. People will get shorter and less happy lives. But there is this big mistake here, that it's true that maybe if everybody who needs to go to a hospital could go to a hospital, then maybe about 2 times as many people would die from the flu in a bad year, would die from corona. But that's if everybody can go to a hospital. And then you could say, okay, the economic damage is so big, let's maybe not do so much, because mostly these people who die will be people who were actually had a very small life expectancy anyway. But the problem is that this R0 is much higher, it's much more contagious, and the hospitalization rate is incomparably higher than from the flu. So this means that it's only a bit like the flu, that if everybody who can go to hospital, who should go to hospital, can go to hospital. And the whole issue here is that if we don't take these measures, if we wouldn't have taken them, then it would have been totally impossible to send even a fraction of people who get it to hospital. So there's a very nice blog about this by David Spiegelhalter, who's one of the most well-known British statisticians. So he said, okay, in one sense, this corona is actually not as bad as some people think it is, because it adds about 1 year of, so normally in the UK, you have about 500,000 people die a year. And it would, if you wouldn't do anything at all, around 500,000 people extra would die. And they would all, most of those, far majority would already be very old. So it would take away 1 year of life expectancy. Seems horrible, but that would be the life expectancy we had 8 years ago. So if you see it like that, maybe it's not so horrible. But the real problem is that all these people would come to this 1 extra year of deaths would come in the course of about a month. So that means that in practice, it would be much, much, much worse, right? Because the whole health system would totally collapse, and probably a lot more people would die because of that. So that is kind of the main story I had to tell. Then there's one more thing I should mention here, which is that there's this debate between people who say, well, you should do less measures, think of the economy, and people who say, no, we should be very strict. But they do all agree that herd immunity is not an option. And it's actually very easy to show that there's a problem there. You can just think like, okay, we have about 2,000 emergency room beds in the Netherlands. People stay there around 3 weeks. And if we would be very strict, maybe we just say, okay, after 2 weeks, we just give up on you. Of course, that would never happen in practice. But let's say they get kicked out after 2 weeks. Then with herd immunity, you need to infect about 60% of the population. And you need to do it in such a way that the intensive care never fills up to more than 2,000, because everybody else basically just dies, everybody who's on top of these 2,000. So then you can simply calculate that this would take you around 5 years. And so there's still people who say we should go for herd immunity, but this calculation, I think you can make all kinds of, make it more detailed, but you get always at least around 3 years you need before you get this herd immunity. And some people have said, well, these are, people from outside who make these back of the envelope calculations. But this is far too complex for back of the envelope calculations. And I was really kind of irritated by seeing those kinds of things in the newspapers, because actually back of the envelope calculations, it is too complex to get good estimates, of course, for back of the envelope calculations. But if showing that something does not work, you can use a back of the envelope calculation there. So that was the story about herd immunity and about why all these measures are necessary. Then I want to end, before I hand over to Martin van Dijk, I want to say some of the things we've been doing out of the CWI machine learning group. So one thing we're doing is that we're assisting the University Medical Center of Utrecht, who does a clinical trial where they're testing BCG vaccinations. So these are vaccinations against tuberculosis. And it's known that they have kind of a side effect that they temporarily boost the immune system. So what they want to do is check whether these vaccinations also boost the immune system sufficiently enough for hospital workers, so that if you give it to hospital workers, that they get ill less often. Because now, the coming months, we will need all the hospital workers we can get all the time. And so we are helping them with the question of whether we can stop early if the results are very convincing, so that we don't need to give placebos anymore, but we can just give this to all hospital workers in the Netherlands or even beyond. Or if we go beyond the originally planned number of hospital workers, so they're trying it out on 1,500 workers, whether maybe we can continue the experiment if the outcomes are still non-conclusive. So this directly ties in with work we've been doing at CWI. And what happens in practice, so this is how we originally got in, but in practice we just have sessions where we discuss many aspects of the statistics of the trial. So we hope we can help them. And then to end with, there's another initiative which was started by my PhD student. I have to say here, I had nothing to do with it, but I think it should be mentioned here. So Judith ter Schuren, she's also board member of the Dutch Vereniging for, so the Dutch Club of Statisticians and Operations Research People. And they have now started like a new, it's kind of an organization where if new clinical trials get started, and they get started all the time now, people can have them checked for the statistical quality. Because what you see now is that in medical centers, they're trying out all kinds of new things against corona, but the statistics there is done often, it's done very hastily. So in this way, they can send their plans to professional statisticians, and these statisticians can then give advice on how to improve the plans and so on. So that's what I wanted to say.